Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something that might feel a little ridiculous. We're going to talk about bread. Yes, bread, while you're trying to sleep. But not just any bread. You're here for the quiet crackle of history, the way old stories crumble softly like the crust of a freshly baked loaf. And honestly, if you're still awake by the end of this, you deserve a medal. Because let's face it, who stays awake listening to 100-year-old bread gossip? You probably won't. You probably can't. You probably shouldn't. You'd never survive a full 30 parts of this. Anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you are and what time it is right now. Are you curled up in bed at 2 a.m.? On a couch somewhere with a blanket pulled over your head? I'd love to know. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking slowly, your steps almost dragging, the kind of walk you do when the night is heavy and the streetlights feel too bright for their own good. The smell hits you first. Warm, toasty, a little sweet, a little nutty, known as baking memories. You follow it, almost unconsciously, like a kid following a cartoon pie smell. You're in Saigon. Not the loud, honking Saigon of today, but an older one, quieter, where the streets hum with bicycles and murmurs instead of engines. The year? Around the early 1900s. The French are here, strutting around in heavy coats that make zero sense in this humidity. And they brought bread, long, heavy, dense loaves of wheat bread that crack when you knock on them. Pain de campagne. You see one of these loaves sitting proudly in a glass display at a French cafe. It's huge, longer than your forearm, thicker than your thigh. You almost laugh because it looks more like a weapon than food. People whispered back then that the first Vietnamese who saw these monster loaves were intimidated, even amused. Some didn't believe they were supposed to eat it. They thought it was just decoration. You step closer, and the cafe owner, a tall man with a curled mustache, is slicing into one. The sound is sharp, crust tearing, crumbs jumping. He spreads butter, thick and cold, onto a slice. You notice a young Vietnamese boy peeking through the window, eyes wide like he's watching a magic trick. Bread like this was unheard of. Rice was soft, sticky, safe. This was alien. You can almost feel the air inside that cafe, cooler, scented with coffee and something slightly sour from the fermenting dough. The French enjoyed this as a luxury. For the locals, it might as well have been gold. Here's the weird part. Historians still argue about whether these early loaves were even eaten fresh by locals. Some say the Vietnamese only started tasting bread after it got a little stale, soaking it in soup to soften it. Others insist that a few curious souls tried biting it as is, only to complain it was like chewing wood. Either way, this was the first quiet meeting between two worlds, one shaped by rice paddies, the other by wheat fields. And you, standing there, can almost taste the future creeping in. Because you know this isn't just bread. This is the first step towards something that will one day hold cilantro, pickled carrots, and slices of pork. But for now, it's just you, a cafe window, and a loaf so intimidating you're almost afraid to touch it. You take a slow breath, you smell roasted beans from a corner, hear the faint metallic clink of a spoon against porcelain, and in the distance, a street vendor hums an old song you can't place. The night air is damp. A moth flutters against the cafe lantern, tapping glass softly, and you think, well, maybe bread isn't so scary after all. You linger outside that cafe, still catching the buttery scent leaking from the doorway. The street around you hums with the lazy rhythm of a colonial evening. Lamps flicker yellow, stretching soft pools of light over the cobblestones. You shift your weight, almost hesitant to walk away, because you know what's happening here isn't just dinner. It's the slow blending of two worlds, even if nobody realizes it yet. You wander a few steps, brushing past a group of French officers sitting stiffly at an outdoor table. Their boots shine so brightly they almost reflect the lanterns. One of them complains, voice sharp, about how the bread here never rises quite right in this heat. You can't help but smirk. Yeah, welcome to Southeast Asia, buddy. Your precious yeast isn't exactly happy sweating in Saigon's 80% humidity. Still, the French keep baking. In big houses with tiled roofs, ovens roar all night long, coughing out those long loaves like a factory line. And for them, this bread isn't just food, it's a piece of home. Every bite, every crust crack is a reminder of cool mornings in Paris, of fog and stone streets far, far away. But for the locals, wheat is a stranger. Rice rules everything here. Rice doesn't need imported flour shipped halfway across the world. Rice doesn't cost a week's wages. That's why at first bread is an elite curiosity, something you see only in these polished cafes and French households. If you're Vietnamese and you get to taste bread back then, it probably means you're serving it to someone else first. And here's a fun, weird fact. Some of the earliest loaves in Vietnam were rumored to arrive already baked from France, packed in tin boxes for long sea voyages. By the time they landed here, they were stale as bricks. The French still ate them proudly, slicing and dipping into soups or wines, pretending they were fresh. Imagine paying a fortune for imported hard bread when rice porridge is cheap and warm just down the street. You follow the street now, stepping over a puddle reflecting a warped image of the French flag fluttering above a government building. In the corner, a local woman squats on a mat selling grilled bananas. She glances at the French soldiers passing by and shakes her head. Bread might smell nice, sure, but to her it's a rich man's vanity. She whispers something under her breath, maybe a joke about how those long loaves look like clumsy wooden sandals. Still, curiosity brews, slowly. You can almost feel it in the way the younger locals glance into bakery windows. The smell is too tempting, too strange to ignore. Wheat flour becomes a whispered dream for those who've never held it, but it's scarce, rationed, expensive. You'd need real connections or a very fat wallet to even get a sack. Historians still argue about whether the first Vietnamese who worked in these bakeries learned willingly or were forced as kitchen staff. Some say a few of them secretly copied recipes at night, scribbling notes about kneading techniques, hiding scraps of dough in rags to practice later. Others doubt that. They think locals weren't interested yet, still loyal to rice. But you, standing here, smelling that faint roasted aroma drifting from a distant bakery chimney, you can tell. Something is stirring. Curiosity always wins. A soft breeze brushes your neck, carrying flour dust and the quiet shuffle of a baker sweeping his doorstep. His apron is ghostly white in the lamplight. He hums a slow French song, but his helper, a young Vietnamese boy, mutters under his breath in his own language, probably cursing at how heavy the dough sacks are. Their worlds don't quite mix yet, but they will. You pause, your stomach growls even though you're not really hungry. The smell of warm bread does that to you. You think about how strange it must feel to taste wheat for the first time, to bite into something that cracks before it melts. Different from rice, different from anything your tongue expects. And somewhere in that quiet, as you watch the boy carry another sack inside, you wonder if he's the first one who'll take this bread and change it forever. The street narrows as you wander farther, the glow of the French cafes shrinking behind you. The air feels heavier here, quieter, like the night is holding its breath. You catch the sound of wheels squeaking over stone, someone's cart rolling lazily along. And then you see it. A baker, arms thick from kneading dough, struggling to carry something that looks absurdly huge. There it is, a loaf so ridiculously oversized you can't help but stare. It's longer than the cart itself, while resting diagonally, wrapped in brown paper that's already tearing at the edges. The poor baker keeps adjusting his grip, muttering under his breath every time the loaf slides a little. You laugh, quietly. You can't help it, it's ridiculous. And honestly, you're not the only one. A few kids tailing him giggle, pointing at the bread like it's some exotic animal. Because, really, who eats something that big? This isn't just your imagination. Back then, bread was made comically large. French bakers prided themselves on producing long, dense loaves, more like tools than snacks. Some early Vietnamese nicknamed them Baguette, Western sticks. You imagine a farmer holding one like a club, pretending to fend off a chicken. And here's the fun part. There's an old rumor that a few of these early loaves were actually used as weapons during street quarrels. Bread so hard you could knock someone's hat clean off. Historians roll their eyes at that story, but they don't fully deny it either. Because, let's be honest, you felt how solid old-style French bread can get when it goes stale. You could probably break a window with it. The baker finally stops to rest, leaning the giant loaf against the wall. The smell hits you again, yeasty, slightly sour, a little burned at the edges. You edge closer, curious, and the baker catches you staring. He gives you a tired grin and gestures toward the loaf as if to say, "Want to carry it for me?" You shake your head, laughing silently because you probably drop it in the first 3 steps. A young Vietnamese man standing nearby tilts his head, studying the loaf with suspicion. His clothes are simple, worn. You watch his eyes narrow, like he's trying to figure out whether this thing is food or a fancy prop for the French to show off. And that's the thing. Back then, a lot of locals didn't quite trust it. Bread wasn't soft, fluffy, or familiar. Rice was gentle. Rice was life. Bread was foreign, heavy, hard. But still, curiosity lingers. That same young man finally steps closer, asks the baker something you can't quite catch, and the baker tears off a small chunk, handing it over. The man hesitates, sniffing it first like he's testing for poison. Then he takes a bite. His jaw works slowly, almost painfully because the crust is thick. He chews, stops, chews again. His face doesn't give much away, but he doesn't spit it out either. He nods once, mutters a quick "duok." It's okay. Not amazing, not awful, just okay. But for a first bite, that's something. The baker chuckles and goes back to hauling his monstrous loaf toward the French Quarter, leaving a trail of crumbs like a clumsy Hansel and Gretel. You stand there for a while, watching the crumbs glint under the dim streetlight. Each tiny piece feels like a small victory, one bite at a time, one curious taste at a time. The wall between rice and wheat cracks, just a little, and maybe, just maybe, you can already smell the future hiding inside those crumbs. You keep walking, following the faint trail of flour dust on the stones, and the street grows quieter with every step. The grand French buildings fade behind you, replaced by low wooden houses, their windows glowing softly with oil lamps. Here, the air smells different, more like roasted peanuts and steamed rice than butter. But tonight, wheat still sneaks into the conversation. You stop near a small market, half closed for the evening. A merchant sits cross-legged, fanning herself lazily, her baskets of vegetables mostly empty now. But tucked carefully in one corner of her stall is something unusual, a small, tightly wrapped paper package of flour. Not rice flour, wheat flour. She eyes it like it's treasure, and in a way, it is. Back then, wheat flour was ridiculously expensive. Imported, rationed, stored in burlap sacks that traveled halfway across the world. Only the wealthy, or those with French connections, could get enough to bake regularly. For ordinary Vietnamese families, even a handful of wheat flour was a luxury, something you buy for special occasions, or to show off a little. You crouch closer, pretending to examine the vegetables, but you can hear the merchant whispering to a neighbor. She's bragging, just a little, about how she traded 3 baskets of fish to get that one tiny packet. Her neighbor laughs and teases, "What are you gonna do? Eat French like a lady now?" The merchant smirks, fanning herself faster. "Maybe I will." You can't help but smile. The idea of sitting down to eat like a French lady is clearly more about status than taste. People want wheat because it's rare, not because it's better than rice. There's a funny little fact here. Some early attempts to bake bread locally were not great. Without proper ovens, some families tried steaming dough or baking it over charcoal, and the result was more like a dense rice cake pretending to be bread. Kids would joke that these homemade loaves could be used as doorstops. Historians still debate how quickly proper baking skills spread among locals. Some say wealthy Vietnamese hired French bakers to teach them. Others think recipes were stolen quietly by servants who peeked into kitchens. There's even an old story about a baker's apprentice sneaking scraps of dough home in his pockets, trying to practice secretly, ruining entire batches before finally getting it right. You glance up at the stars, barely visible through the hazy night. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a faint thunk as a baker slams dough against a wooden counter, beating air into it. The sound echoes strangely in the quiet streets like a soft drum. And then you imagine something silly. A family saving up for months just to buy a small loaf, sitting around it like it's a ceremonial feast. You almost laugh because you picture them slicing it into paper-thin pieces, chewing slowly, pretending they love it even if their jaws ache. The merchant finally packs up, cradling her precious flour bundle like a baby as she disappears into the narrow alley. You watch her go, thinking about how one day wheat will stop being rare. One day it will be as normal as rice. But right now, it's still a symbol, a quiet little badge of modernity, carried carefully under someone's arm. You keep walking, and for a brief moment, you can almost taste the change in the air, the slow shift from tradition to curiosity. The bread hasn't truly become Vietnamese yet, but you can feel the first cracks forming in that old rice-dominated world. The night feels thicker now, warm and humming softly with distant cicadas. You turn a corner and find yourself on a quieter street where lantern light pools lazily in doorways. There's a small house ahead with shutters wide open, and from inside drifts a sound that's half argument, half laughter. You pause, leaning against the doorframe, pretending you're just a shadow. Inside, a Frenchman in a stained white apron paces around, gesturing wildly with flour-dusted hands. His voice rises, sharp, impatient. Across from him, a young Vietnamese assistant, thin, nervous, tries to copy his motions, kneading dough with awkward, jerky movements. This is one of the earliest attempts at teaching locals to bake bread properly. Not in some fancy French bakery, but right here in a cramped little kitchen that smells of yeast and sweat. The Frenchman slams his fist into the dough, muttering something about trop humide, too humid. You stifle a smile. Yeah, welcome to Southeast Asia, monsieur. Your precious wheat doesn't like sweating any more than you do. The young assistant glances at the door nervously, as if wishing he could escape this floury nightmare. There's something comical about it. The French have all the techniques, but they can't stop complaining. The locals have all the patience, but they're not exactly enthusiastic about baking giant bricks of foreign bread. The two worlds clash in the softest, strangest way possible over dough. Still, progress creeps forward. The assistant presses his palm into the dough more carefully now, copying the Frenchman's movements, and you can see the faintest flicker of understanding in his eyes. This isn't rice dough. This is something alive, stretching and pushing back under his fingers. And here's a curious little truth. Not every French baker wanted to teach. Some were forced to because they needed cheap labor, others because colonial officials encouraged sharing civilization. But a few genuinely enjoyed it, hoping to pass on the craft. Historians still argue over which group made the bigger impact. Did knowledge spread because of kindness or convenience? The Frenchman finally stops, wiping his forehead, leaving a streak of flour across his face. He grabs a hunk of dough from the assistant, stretches it, and shakes his head with theatrical disappointment. The assistant mutters something under his breath in Vietnamese. Probably not a compliment, and you bite back a laugh. The weirdest part? Early records mention some of these apprentices trying to bake secretly at home after lessons. But they messed up the timing so badly, the dough over-fermented, smelling almost alcoholic. Neighbors would tease them, asking if they were trying to open a bakery or a bar. You stay there, watching as the Frenchman finally softens, patting the assistant's shoulder. The oven glows in the corner, heat shimmering. A loaf slides in, its crust to be waiting quietly for transformation. And you think about how strange this is. How history sometimes moves not with wars or speeches, but with a tired man teaching another tired man how to knead dough in a humid kitchen. The assistant exhales, shoulders slumping, and for a second, you swear he almost smiles. Maybe he's imagining something, maybe a future where he bakes bread, not for the French, but for his own people. You lean away from the door, stepping back into the street, leaving them to their quiet battle with flour and heat. The night air outside feels cooler, scented faintly with baking bread that's still just a little too French for this land. But you can feel it. A shift. The first cracks in tradition widening. One lesson, one loaf at a time. The street feels softer under your feet now, the stones cooling as the night stretches deeper. You follow the smell, faint but distinct, like warm toast carried on a lazy breeze. Somewhere nearby, someone is working late, long after the other kitchens have gone quiet. You find the source at the end of a narrow alley. A small brick oven glows faintly, its heat spilling into the darkness like a secret. A man crouches beside it, sleeves rolled high, the sweat glistening even in the dim light. He's not French, he's Vietnamese, and he's doing something unusual, whispering to a bowl of bubbling dough as if it can hear him. It's not magic, not exactly. It's men na, yeast, the invisible life of bread. Up until now, most attempts to bake here have been rushed, resulting in dense, heavy loaves, but tonight he's trying something different. He's learned, probably from watching the French bakeries, That yeast isn't just an ingredient. It's alive, it breathes, it needs care. You crouch behind a stack of baskets, watching him work. He stirs the bowl gently, almost affectionately, checking the bubbles. The smell is tangier, a little sour but pleasant. He smiles to himself, and you can tell this feels like a small victory. Getting yeast to cooperate in Saigon's sticky heat is no easy task. Here's the fun part. There's an old rumor that the first truly successful Vietnamese bread yeast was kept alive in a clay jar for months, even passed between families like a shared secret. Some say it started accidentally from rice wine fermentation, but bakers learned to adapt it for wheat. Historians still argue about whether this was intentional genius or just lucky improvisation. The man wipes his hands on his apron, glances toward the oven, and slides a loaf in. The oven light flickers across his face, and you see the hope there. You wonder if he's nervous, because if this works, the bread will finally be lighter, airier, something locals might actually enjoy eating without breaking their teeth. He leans back on his heels, exhausted, and sips from a chipped teacup, eyes fixed on the oven like it's hatching an egg. The street outside is silent, just the occasional chirp of a night insect. You can almost feel the suspense with him, as if you're both waiting for that first perfect rise. And it makes you laugh quietly, because here you are, sitting in the dark, rooting for a loaf of bread. But it matters. This is a turning point. The man eventually pulls the loaf out, setting it on a wooden board. Steam curls up, carrying a richer smell than usual. He taps the crust lightly. It sounds different, lighter. He breaks off a piece, blowing on it before tasting. His eyes widen, and for a second, you swear he almost tears up. He whispers something, maybe a prayer, maybe just "Duk Roy." It worked. You can't help smiling. Somewhere in this tiny alley on an unremarkable night, a quiet revolution begins, not with politics or speeches, but with a bowl of living yeast and one tired man determined to make it work. You step away into the darkness again, leaving him to his victory, but the scent follows you. It's softer now, more inviting. You can feel it. Bread is slowly starting to belong here. The air feels richer tonight, as if the scent of success from that tiny alley has drifted across the city. You follow it instinctively, your steps light until you turn onto a street lined with warm lanterns. A cafe door swings open ahead, and for the first time, the smell of bread isn't just wheat and yeast. It's layered, deeper, almost decadent. You stop by the doorway, peeking inside. The place glows gold, filled with quiet chatter and the clinking of cups. But what catches your attention is a tray sliding out from the kitchen. On it, resting like tiny treasures, are slices of bread spread with something creamy and glistening, topped with thin, delicate strips of meat. This is new. This isn't just bread anymore. This is pâté and jambon, straight from French culinary traditions. For the colonists, it's nothing special, just a familiar snack. But for the locals who manage to sneak a bite, it's a revelation. Rich, savory, and far more luxurious than the plain, crusty loaves they've been staring at for months. You step closer, pretending to admire the tiled floor, but really you're watching the plates go by. A young Vietnamese waiter balances them carefully, eyes darting nervously as if the food might slip. You catch a glimpse of his expression, part pride, part curiosity. He probably hasn't tasted any of it, not officially, but you can tell he's tempted. And here's a strange little truth. Early on, pâté wasn't even made locally. It came in tin cans, shipped from Europe, thick and heavy with butter. Expensive, of course, but irresistible to anyone who got the chance to taste it. Some historians argue about whether the first pâté used in Vietnam was even French-made. Others suspect Chinese traders brought cheaper imitations that made their way into colonial kitchens. The waiter disappears into the back for a moment, and you catch him sneaking a tiny finger swipe of pâté from the side of a tin, glancing over his shoulder like a guilty child. He licks it quickly, eyes widening, then grins to himself before wiping his hands clean. A French officer nearby laughs loudly, biting into his sandwich with thick slices of jambon, completely unaware of the quiet revolution happening behind the scenes. Because you can feel it. Locals are watching, learning, tasting when they can. Every stolen bite, every curious glance, plants the seeds for what's coming. You lean against the doorframe a little longer, letting the smell wash over you. The bread is lighter now, thanks to those long nights with yeast experiments, and paired with pâté, it's dangerously good. The funny part? Some early Vietnamese taste testers didn't love jam bun at first. It was too salty, too unfamiliar. But pâté, that soft, savory spread, won people over almost immediately. Even those who couldn't afford it started dreaming of making their own, cheaper version. The waiter reappears, sliding plates onto a table with practiced ease, but you notice him eyeing the last slice of bread left on the tray. He hesitates, then shrugs, and pops it into his mouth before anyone notices. A small rebellion, but a sweet one. You smile to yourself. Because right here, in this warm little cafe, the future banh mi is taking its first slow, delicious breaths. One slice of bread, one smear of pâté at a time. You leave the cafe behind, stepping into the cooler night air. But the richness of that pâté still clings to your senses. You walk slowly, hands brushing against the rough wooden walls of the nearby houses, and you notice something strange. Another scent mingling with the bread aroma now. It's sharp, green, alive. You follow it, turning down a side street where a small group of women sit crouched on low stools, washing bundles of herbs in wooden basins. Their laughter fills the quiet street as water splashes over piles of rau thum, cilantro, mint, and Thai basil, their fragrance almost electric compared to the buttery French kitchen smell. One of the women glances toward a bakery cart parked nearby. She leans in toward her friend, whispering with a grin. And then, bold as anything, she picks up a sprig of cilantro, strolls over to the cart, and casually tucks it inside her own sandwich. The baker behind the cart frowns, mutters something about ruining perfectly good French food, but she just shrugs and takes a bite, chewing happily. This is how it starts, the quiet rebellion of flavor. For the French, bread was meant to be simple, pure, a vessel for meat and butter. But for the Vietnamese, food isn't food without herbs. Meals here are alive with greens, with freshness, with balance. The bread is just too plain. And here's a funny little fact. Some early French bakers actually scolded their Vietnamese customers for contaminating sandwiches with herbs. But locals didn't care. Cilantro slipped in anyway, first quietly, then confidently. You watch as another woman follows suit, tearing off a small piece of baguette and stuffing it with mint leaves before popping it into her mouth. She giggles, waving a hand in front of her face as the strong scent fills her nose. Better, she says simply, and the others laugh. Historians still debate who really started this herb revolution. Was it street vendors experimenting to please local tastes? Or was it just ordinary people, bored with the blandness of French recipes, sneaking in their own touches? Nobody agrees, but you can see it happening right here, right now, and it feels inevitable. The baker, resigned, turns back to his cart, muttering under his breath. But you catch him stealing a quick bite of a herb-stuffed piece someone left behind. His face softens for a second, and you swear you see the tiniest smirk tugging at his lips. The smell of cilantro hangs in the warm air as you walk past, sharp and fresh against the deeper scent of baking bread. It feels like the first real shift of identity, French food, bending ever so slightly to local taste. You can't help but grin. Because once you let herbs in, there's no turning back. The bread is starting to taste like Vietnam. You keep walking, the night stretching long and slow, the lanterns flickering like sleepy fireflies. That sharp herbal scent fades behind you, replaced by something briny, sour-sweet, and unmistakably familiar. Do chua, pickled vegetables. You follow the smell until you reach a small stall tucked under the corner of a torn canvas awning. A woman sits behind it, her hands moving quickly as she packs thin strips of carrot and daikon into glass jars filled with cloudy vinegar. The liquid glints pale under the lamplight, catching bubbles that cling to the edges of the vegetables. She glances up at you briefly, then back at her work, tapping the jars gently to settle everything. There's a loaf of bread resting beside her, cut into two uneven halves, the crust already softening in the humid air. She picks it up with one hand, opens it clumsily, and, without hesitation, shoves a fistful of pickled vegetables inside. It's not elegant, not French, and definitely not something a proper Parisian would approve of. But it makes sense. Vietnam is hot, the air heavy, and fatty meats and thick pâté feel almost too rich under this weather. The bright, crunchy bite of pickled carrots and daikon cuts through it, refreshing in a way no one in Paris ever imagined. Here's a strange little fact. Early French colonists sometimes complained that local cooks ruined their food by adding cheap street pickles. But the locals loved it. Some even started making their own, lighter, quicker pickles instead of waiting for expensive imported cornichons. Historians still argue whether this was adaptation out of necessity or just personal taste winning out. The woman takes a bite, eyes closing briefly in quiet satisfaction. The sour crunch mixes with the bread's soft interior, and she nods to herself like she's solved a personal mystery. A man passing by stops, watching curiously. "What's that?" he asks, raising an eyebrow. She shrugs, mouth full, and mumbles, "Better this way." He hesitates, then hands her a coin, and she quickly makes him one too. Bread stuffed with pickles, no meat, just tart vegetables and a smear of something that might be leftover lard. He chews, his face lighting up with a surprised grin. You lean against the stall quietly, breathing in the sharp, vinegary tang that stings your nose just a little. This is it, you think. Another small but important step. The French brought bread, but the Vietnamese are giving it soul. Bright, crunchy, sour soul. You can almost hear the future in the quiet crunch of that first bite. The bread isn't just changing flavor, it's learning to breathe differently, to belong here in this warm, noisy herb-filled land. The night is alive now, even this late. You wander toward the heart of the city where the streets stretch wider, brighter, buzzing with chatter and clinking glasses. The air feels different here, thicker with smoke from grilled meats, sweeter with the smell of condensed milk swirling into coffee. But underneath it all, there's still that warm, toasty whisper of baking bread. You stop at a corner where light spills onto the street from an open front shop. A painted sign creaks above it, letters fading, but the inside is bustling. People squeeze onto wooden benches, talking loudly, their hands wrapped around long loaves sliced open and overflowing with fillings. For the first time tonight, you feel it. Banh Mi isn't just curiosity anymore. It's a craze. This is Saigon, 1930s, and bread has exploded into something new. French cafes still exist, sure, but this is chaos. Dozens of loaves stacked on counters, bakers working non-stop, the hiss of knives slicing crusts open, the slap of fillings stuffed inside. A vendor pushes past you, balancing a bamboo tray piled high with bread. Nan Len. Hurry, he calls to his helper, darting back inside for another batch. You can't help but smile. The energy is contagious. Here's a curious fact most people don't know. Early Saigonese bakers didn't just sell to the French elite. They started targeting locals deliberately, making smaller, cheaper loaves, slicing them thinly so more people could afford a taste. Some even swapped expensive butter for a lighter, cheaper spread made from animal fat, just to keep costs down. Historians still debate what sparked the true Banh Mi boom. Was it the growing urban middle class hungry for something modern? Or was it just smart vendors realizing bread was easier to sell than cooked rice in the rush of city life? Nobody agrees, but you can see it working right here. Right now. You step closer, watching as a young boy barely tall enough to see over the counter shoves a loaf into a paper bag for a waiting customer. His hands move fast, practiced like he's been doing this forever. The customer, a rickshaw driver still dripping sweat from the day, takes the bag, bites into the loaf as he walks away, and sighs happily, like the crunch itself is worth the money. The noise inside the shop rises, a mix of laughter, orders shouted over each other, and the constant crackle of crusts breaking. Bread isn't fancy anymore. It's alive, fast, loud, just like the city itself. You lean against a post, breathing it all in, letting the smell wrap around you. The French might not have intended this, but the bread has escaped their hands. It belongs to Saigon now, woven into its heartbeat, carried in the hands of rickshaw drivers, shopgirls, and schoolchildren. You smile because this is no longer just bread. This is the beginning truly Vietnamese. You move away from the busy shop, stepping into a quieter side street where the energy softens and the shadows stretch long under flickering lanterns. The city may be buzzing, but here it feels slower, more personal. You follow the faint crunch of someone biting into bread and find a small family sitting cross-legged on the floor of a tiny house, their meal laid out on a bamboo mat. At the center is a single loaf of bread, already sliced into uneven chunks. The father carefully tears another piece, handing it to the youngest child, as if it were something rare, something precious. And it is. For the first time, bread isn't just a foreign delicacy. It's slowly becoming affordable for ordinary families. The loaf isn't as big or as perfect as the ones you saw in French bakeries. It's smaller, slightly misshapen, with cracks along the crust that hint at cheaper ingredients. But it works. It's light enough to chew without effort, and it's cheap enough that a working family can share one without guilt. Here's a fun little fact. The real turning point for banh mi's popularity came when local bakers started cutting the loaves smaller and lighter. Some even hollowed them out more aggressively. Less dough, same satisfying crunch. Customers loved it because it felt like more bread for less money, even if it was mostly air inside. Clever, right? The father dips his piece into a small saucer of soy sauce mixed with chopped chili. The kids copy him, crunching happily, their laughter soft in the dim room. You can almost taste it yourself, the salty heat soaking into the fluffy inside, the crust breaking with a sound just sharp enough to make you hungry. Historians still argue about who first decided to shrink the loaves. Some credit an unknown street vendor desperate to sell more for less. Others think it was simply practicality. Big loaves went stale too fast in the heat. Whoever it was, they accidentally unlocked the future. Vietnamese bread was no longer heavy or intimidating. It was quick, light, easy to eat. The mother breaks off the last piece, tucks it into her child's hand, and wipes crumbs from the mat. The loaf is gone, but the smiles linger. This isn't a fancy meal, but it's a sign of change. You linger in the doorway, invisible, watching as they clear the mat and prepare for sleep. The night hums softly outside, and you can almost feel the excitement of something new creeping into these quiet homes, one crusty bite at a time. The streets grow quieter as you move farther from the houses, but the city doesn't sleep entirely. Somewhere ahead you hear a squeak, soft, rhythmic, like a bird trapped in a cage. You follow it and find the source. A wooden cart with two squeaky wheels parked under a dim street lamp. A man stands behind it, wiping his brow with the corner of his shirt. His cart is stacked with loaves of bread, wrapped in newspaper, the smell wafting lazily into the humid night. He glances around, adjusts the tiny oil lantern hanging from the cart, and calls out softly, almost singing, "Banh Mi day, Nong day." This is the beginning of the Banh Mi cart revolution. No fancy shops, no cafe tables, just a cart on the street, ready to bring bread to anyone who wants it. You watch him carefully assemble a loaf for his first customer of the night, a woman balancing a sleeping baby on her hip. He slices the bread quickly, hollowing out the middle with practiced hands, then stuffs it with a smear of pâté, a few thin slices of cold meat, and, to your quiet delight, a small handful of herbs and pickled vegetables. Here's a curious little fact. Historians believe the first true banh mi vendors didn't have proper shops at all. Instead, carts became the real backbone of bread culture in Vietnam. Some even converted old ice cream carts, fitting them with makeshift wooden shelves and tiny coal stoves to keep loaves warm. The woman takes the bread, handing over a few coins, and bites into it immediately. You hear the soft crack as the crust gives way, and she closes her eyes for a second, savoring the mix of salty, sour, and fresh. She shifts the baby on her hip and walks away, chewing happily, disappearing into the night. The vendor exhales, leaning against his cart. You can almost feel his exhaustion, but also his quiet pride, because for him, this isn't just food, this is livelihood. Each loaf sold means his children eat tomorrow. And here's something funny. Early vendors had to fight for space. Street gossip says some pushed their carts into prime spots before dawn just to claim customers. Others bribed local guards for better corners, while some, less polite, simply yelled louder than their competition. The vendor catches you staring, but he just smiles, nodding as if to say, want one. You shake your head gently, but stay, watching as another customer approaches. A rickshaw driver this time, sweaty, hungry, coins jingling in his hand. The cart squeaks as it shifts under the weight of the vendor's movements. The night smells like vinegar, cilantro, and freshly baked crust swirling together in the warm air. You can feel it. This is where banh mi truly becomes street food. Not trapped in cafes, not reserved for the rich, but rolling through the city on two squeaky wheels, feeding everyone who's hungry enough to stop. And you know this is just the beginning. The carts are multiplying. Tomorrow there will be another on this street, and then another, until the whole city smells like fresh bread at dawn. The city feels heavier now, the night air warmer, thicker, humming with the low murmur of distant voices. You follow the faint sound of footsteps crunching on gravel, and suddenly the world shifts. The streets are darker, quieter, not because the city is asleep, but because it's wartime. You stand near a corner where a group of men in worn uniforms sit crouched, their rifles leaning against a wall. They're young, tired, faces streaked with dust. Between them, someone unwraps a bundle of old newspaper, revealing loaves of bread. Some cracked, some slightly stale, but nobody complains. This is banh mi in war. Not luxury, not comfort food, just survival. The men tear pieces off quickly, stuffing them into their mouths as if afraid someone might snatch them away. A few dip the bread into tin mugs of watered-down stew, softening the crust. Another pulls out a small jar of chili paste, passing it around like treasure, each soldier taking only a tiny smear. Here's a strange, almost ironic fact. During war, banh mi became popular partly because it was fast and portable. Unlike rice, which needed to be cooked, bread could be carried for days. Some soldiers even joked that a loaf was both food and weapon. Eat it or throw it, depending on which you needed more. Historians still argue whether the French or local troops spread this habit faster. Some say French rations inspired it, while others believe local vendors following the soldiers made banh mi accessible to everyone on the move. One young soldier sitting at the edge of the group chews slowly, lost in thought. You can almost feel his longing as he stares at his loaf. It's not just food to him, it's a small reminder of home, of quiet mornings before the world turned to chaos. The distant boom of artillery rolls through the air, soft but heavy. A few men glance toward the sound, but no one stops eating. The bread keeps them grounded, keeps them moving. Nearby, you catch sight of a woman crouched behind a cart, handing out loaves wrapped in old paper to soldiers passing by. Her hands move fast, but her eyes are soft, lingering on each face for a second longer than necessary, as if silently wishing them safe return. The smell of bread here is different. Less joyful, more desperate. But it's still there, weaving through the tension, a quiet comfort in the middle of fear. You take a step back, letting the night swallow you again. The soldiers finish their meal quickly, brushing crumbs from their hands before standing, rifles slung over tired shoulders. And as they march away, the last thing you notice is the trail of crumbs they leave behind. Small, fragile pieces of normal life scattered across a war-torn street. The war drums fade behind you as you move deeper into the city. The streets quieter now, littered with broken crates and torn posters flapping weakly in the night breeze. But even in this uneasy calm, the smell of bread lingers. Different now, cheaper, humbler, but still stubbornly alive. You turn a corner and find a small stall lit by a single flickering oil lamp. A woman in a faded ao baba crouches behind it, slicing bread with a dull knife. But something's missing. No pate, no jambon. Instead, she's spooning a thick, steaming mixture into the open loaves. Shumai, soft pork meatballs simmered in tomato sauce. You watch as she works quickly, scooping a single meatball with a splash of sauce into each loaf. Customers wait patiently in a short line, coins clinking in their hands. Most are workers, some still in patched uniforms, others barefoot. They're hungry, and this is affordable. Here's the truth. During wartime and the hard years that followed, meat was scarce and expensive. French cold cuts were nearly impossible to get, so vendors improvised. Pork meatballs, cheaper cuts of meat, even chalua, Vietnamese pork sausage, started replacing fancy fillings. There's a funny rumor historians love to argue about. Some say shumai wasn't even meant for bread at first. It was a Chinese dish served with rice, but desperate vendors started ladling it into loaves when rice ran short. Others believe it was a deliberate experiment to stretch one pot of food further. Whatever the reason, it worked, and people loved it. A man in line finally gets his loaf, tears into it immediately, sauce dripping onto his hands. He doesn't care. He chews fast, nodding to himself, then hands a coin back to the woman as a quiet, "Thank you." She smiles briefly before turning to the next customer. The smell is different from earlier French-influenced bread. Richer, sweeter, heavy with garlic and tomatoes simmered too long in a battered pot. It feels warmer somehow, less foreign. A young boy sitting nearby licks the last streaks of sauce from his fingers, his face lighting up like this is the best thing he's ever eaten. And maybe it is. You can feel it now. Banh mi isn't just surviving the war, it's transforming. Bit by bit, with every substitution, every improvised filling, it's becoming something new, something Vietnamese to its core. You take one last look at the stall as the woman ladles another scoop of shoo mai into a waiting loaf. The oil lamp flickers, the sauce bubbles quietly, and the night hums with the soft crackle of bread crusts breaking under hungry hands. The street grows narrower as you continue, the air tinged with the faint sweetness of simmering sugar and eggs. You follow it instinctively until you find yourself standing in front of a small, dimly lit kitchen. A woman in her 40s leans over a battered metal bowl, stirring something that glistens pale yellow under the weak light. It's mayonnaise, but not the thick, glossy kind you've seen in French cafes. This is different, looser, almost watery. She dips her finger in, tastes it, and frowns before adding a splash of vinegar and stirring again, the whisk scraping the bowl with soft, rhythmic clinks. Back then, eggs were expensive, and oil wasn't easy to find either. So vendors began making Vietnamese-style mayonnaise, a lighter version stretched thin to save ingredients. Some mixed in condensed milk for sweetness, others added extra vinegar or even rice starch to bulk it out. Historians still debate who first came up with this thrifty recipe. Was it an inventive street vendor desperate to stretch every coin? Or was it borrowed from Chinese-style sauces already used in dim sum kitchens? No one agrees, but what's clear is this change stuck, and locals love the lighter, tangier taste more than the heavy French version. You step closer, watching as the woman scoops the mayonnaise into a chipped jar, her hands moving quickly. A line of bread loaves sits beside her, already sliced and ready. She grabs one, smears the sauce generously inside, then adds a few slices of chalua and pickled vegetables. A young man waits by the counter, his stomach growling audibly. He takes the loaf, bites into it, and grins through a mouthful of food. "Non quoi? So good," he mumbles. The woman laughs, waving him away before turning back to her whisk. The smell of the kitchen wraps around you. Vinegar sharp, eggs faintly sweet, bread warm and comforting. This isn't French anymore. This is clever, frugal, distinctly Vietnamese ingenuity, turning a colonial luxury into everyday food. The woman pauses for a moment, stirring lazily now, humming a quiet tune as she works. There's pride in her movements, even if she doesn't say it, because with every whisk, every smear, she's helping shape the banh mi we know today, creamy, tangy, fresh, and undeniably local. You step back into the street, leaving her to her quiet craft, but the scent lingers, almost teasing, as the night breeze carries it away. The streets are softer now, calmer, the air carrying that familiar mix of warm bread and the faint tang of vinegar. You follow a different sound this time, not the scrape of knives or the squeak of a cart, but something musical, almost hypnotic. It's a voice, long and drawn out, echoing through the alley. "Banh Mi Nong Dai." You turn a corner and find him, a man walking slowly, balancing a wooden pole across his shoulders, two baskets hanging from either end. One basket holds loaves wrapped in old newspaper, the other has small jars of pickled vegetables and a tin of homemade mayonnaise. His voice rises and falls like a lullaby, the first legendary street cry of banh mi vendors. The sound cuts through the quiet night, weaving between doorways, lingering in the humid air. You notice windows creak open, curious heads poking out. A woman steps outside, coins clinking in her hand, and waves him over. He sets the baskets down gently, still humming his call under his breath. His hands move fast, slice the loaf, smear the sauce, add herbs, stuff in chalua, wrap it, hand it over. The woman smiles, bites into it before she's even back inside, nodding in quiet approval. Here's a curious truth. Historians still debate when exactly the Banh Mi street cry became iconic. Some argue it started in Saigon's busy alleys in the 1940s. Others think it was borrowed from northern hawkers who used to sing their wares in marketplaces. What's certain is that it became so recognizable that children could mimic it perfectly before they could even read. You watch as the vendor picks up his pole again, adjusting it across his shoulders. His voice rises once more, long and slow, carrying far into the night. You catch a faint smile on his face as another door opens down the street, someone else waving him over. There's something comforting about that sound. It feels like a promise, a warm loaf delivered straight to your door, even if you didn't know you wanted it. A boy sitting nearby mimics the call, his voice cracking on the long notes, and his friends laugh, pretending to balance imaginary baskets. The vendor chuckles at them, shaking his head but not stopping. He keeps walking, voice steady, steps patient. You follow him for a while, letting the rhythm of his cry blend with the soft crunch of footsteps on dusty stone. The night feels slower here, wrapped in that gentle song. And as you walk, you realize something. The smell of Banh Mi might lure people in, but it's this voice, the steady, soothing cry, that truly ties it to the heart of the streets. The night grows cooler now, a soft breeze brushing against your face as you leave the narrow alleys and step into a wider street. The lanterns are fewer here, but you can still make out shapes moving fast. Rickshaws, bicycles, and tired workers heading home after a long day. And there, by the side of the road, is a small wooden bench next to a bicycle leaning lazily against a wall. A man sits on the bench, one hand gripping his handlebars, the other holding a half-eaten loaf of banh mi. He chews quickly, almost in a rush, his eyes darting toward the dim factory lights in the distance. This is banh mi for the working class, for people who don't have time to sit and eat properly. A group of men nearby do the same, sitting on overturned crates, bread balanced awkwardly in their hands as they gulp down sips of iced tea from chipped glasses. One of them laughs mid-bite, crumbs scattering across his shirt, while another chews silently, staring into the night as if counting how many hours of sleep he'll get before work starts again. Here's a fun little fact. Banh Mi's real rise in popularity came not from cafes or fancy carts, but from its sheer convenience. It was quick, cheap, and portable, perfect for workers dashing to factories or pedaling rickshaws through the morning chaos. Some vendors even started opening shop before dawn, timing their fresh batches with the workers' morning shifts. Historians still debate whether this was when Banh Mi truly became the people's food. Some insist it happened earlier, but you can see it here, clear as day. These aren't wealthy city folks, they're laborers, and they're eating it like it's always been theirs. One man finishes his loaf in 3 bites, tosses the last crumb to a stray dog wagging its tail nearby, and hops back on his bicycle, pedaling away into the dark. Another folds the newspaper his loaf came in, tucks it into his pocket to reuse later, and sighs, stretching his tired arms before heading home. You take a deep breath, and the air smells like warm bread, faintly sour pickles, and sweat from long, honest work. There's no luxury here, no polished cafe tables, just hunger, satisfaction, and a loaf that keeps the city moving. You step aside as another cyclist whizzes past, one hand steering, the other clutching a loaf of banh mi he bites into without even slowing down. Crumbs trail behind him, glinting briefly in the moonlight before disappearing into the dust. And you smile, because this fast, messy, on-the-go way of eating is what finally cements banh mi as more than just food. It's a part of life, slipping into every corner of the city, carried in one hand while the other keeps pedaling forward. The night stretches thin as you leave the busy workers' street, the distant hum of bicycle bells fading behind you. The air grows cooler and you catch a faint, rhythmic rumble, like a beast breathing in the dark. You follow it until the shadows part, revealing the great iron body of a train, its windows glowing dimly in the early dawn. Vendors hurry along the platform, balancing baskets, shouting orders, passing parcels through open windows. And among the baskets piled high with bananas, boiled peanuts, and rice cakes, you spot them. Loaves of banh mi, stacked neatly in wooden trays, ready to travel. This is how banh mi begins to spread beyond the city, by train, carried in bulk to provinces far from Saigon's bustling streets. A woman in a faded conical hat lifts a tray of loaves, handing them to a young man climbing onto the train. He grins, balancing the tray carefully as he makes his way down the aisle, selling bread to passengers who sit yawning, waiting for departure. You step closer to the open window, listening to the soft crackle of crusts being torn apart inside the train. A mother feeds her sleepy child small bites, blowing on them first to cool the steam trapped inside the bread. Across the aisle, a traveling merchant dips his banh mi into a small tin of fish sauce he's cleverly brought with him. Here's a little-known fact. Before trains, bread rarely reached rural provinces. It simply went stale too fast. But vendors learned to bake lighter loaves that stayed crisp longer, and they wrapped them tightly in layers of newspaper to preserve warmth. Historians still debate whether this innovation was born out of necessity or pure marketing genius, but either way, it worked. You lean against a wooden post as the train bell rings, a long, mournful sound that seems to stretch into the morning mist. The vendors shout final offers, handing off the last loaves to passengers leaning out of windows. Coins clink, hands wave, and slowly the train lurches forward. Through one open window, you catch sight of a young boy holding a loaf like it's treasure. He takes a cautious bite, eyes wide, then offers it to his grandmother sitting beside him. She smiles faintly, chewing slowly, as if tasting not just bread, but something entirely new. The train moves faster now, wheels clattering, carrying the scent of warm bread into distant villages where rice still rules every meal. You watch it disappear into the mist, the faint smell of yeast and pickled vegetables lingering in the air. And you know that by tonight, someone far away will be taking their very first bite of banh mi, wondering why they never tried it sooner. The train's echo fades into the night as you drift back into the city's quieter streets. But something new lingers in the air, sharp, almost fiery, tickling your nose. You follow the scent until you reach a small street cart glowing under a weak lantern. The vendor, a wiry man with quick hands, moves faster than you've seen all night. He slices open a loaf, spreads a thin layer of mayonnaise, adds a few strips of chalua, a handful of pickled carrots, and daikon. And then, almost absent-mindedly, he does something unusual. He grabs a small red chili, slices it into thin rings, and tucks it inside the bread. The customer, a young rickshaw driver, takes the loaf, hesitates for half a second, and then bites. His eyes widen, his chewing slows, and for a moment, you think he regrets it. But then a grin spreads across his face as he nods, wiping sweat already forming on his forehead. This is the birth of a small but powerful detail: fresh chili in Banh Mi. Here's the funny part. Historians don't agree on who started it. Some say it was accidental, vendors running out of black pepper simply substituted sliced chili. Others claim it was deliberate, a way to satisfy locals who thought French food was too bland. Whatever the reason, it stuck. The vendor slices another chili, drops the rings into a fresh loaf, and glances at you briefly as if asking, "Want to try?" You shake your head with a quiet smile, watching instead as another customer, a young woman this time, takes her first bite. She winces, fans her mouth with one hand, but takes another bite anyway, laughing softly at herself. The chili adds more than heat, it adds personality. The sharp burn wakes you up, cutting through the richness of pate and the sweetness of pickled vegetables. And in this humid night, that little burst of fire feels alive, almost necessary. A group of kids runs past, laughing as they mimic the rickshaw driver's earlier face, pretending to choke on imaginary heat. One of them dares another to eat a whole chili. The others scatter, giggling uncontrollably. The vendor keeps working, slipping those bright red rings into each loaf without even asking anymore. Because after tonight, everyone will expect it. The scent of sliced chili hangs heavy in the air as you step back, feeling the warmth of the lantern on your face. The Banh Mi is no longer just adapting, it's developing a kick, a boldness that feels entirely Vietnamese. You smile because now every bite has a little spark of mischief hidden inside. The air changes as you walk farther, the night breeze cooling, but the streets feel heavier, slower, quieter, like the city itself is holding its breath. You know why. Times are harder now. You can feel it in the way the markets have fewer lights, the carts fewer customers, the smell of bread less rich than before. You turn into a narrow alley and find a small bakery with cracked walls, its wooden sign faded and chipped. Inside, a man stands over a mixing bowl, his brow furrowed, his sleeves rolled up. But the dough in his hands looks wrong. It's not the usual soft, pale wheat dough. It's thicker, duller, tinged slightly gray. This is Banh Mi during the Bao Cup years, rationing, shortages, substitutions. The man kneads slowly, adding a scoop of white powder from a tin, stirring it into the dough. But you notice immediately, it's not wheat flour. It's rice flour mixed in to stretch the precious scarce wheat as far as possible. The result? Bread that bakes hard, cracks fast, and sometimes crumbles like old stone. Here's a harsh little truth. During these tough years, bread often became so dense that people joked you could use it as a hammer. Some even nicknamed it Banh Mi Vũ Khí, weapon bread. Historians still chuckle over old stories of workers tapping their loaves against tables just to prove how solid they were. A woman enters the shop, handing over ration coupons instead of coins. The baker exchanges them for 2 loaves, apologizing quietly for their size. She nods, accepting them without complaint, holding them carefully as if even these imperfect loaves are precious. You step closer, inhaling the faint scent of the baking loaves. It's different now, less yeasty, more like roasted rice, almost bland. But it's still bread, still warm, still something to fill empty stomachs. A boy waiting outside kicks at a loose stone, like grumbling that he misses real banh mi, the kind with crispy crusts and soft insides. His mother hushes him, handing him a small piece to chew. He takes it reluctantly, biting down with effort, but eventually he eats it all, licking the crumbs from his fingers. The baker watches quietly from the doorway, his face tired but determined, because even in hard times he keeps baking, and people keep coming. Banh mi, no matter how dry or dense, has become too important to disappear. You stand there for a moment, listening to the quiet crackle of the hard loaves cooling on the wooden shelves. The smell might be duller, the taste rougher, but the spirit of it, the resilience, is still strong. And as you step back into the alley, you think to yourself, even when it's barely bread at all, banh mi refuses to die. The air feels different as you leave the quiet rationed streets behind. The night opens into cooler, thinner air, and the city lights fade into a softer, misty glow. You climb gently uphill, the breeze carrying a faint scent of pine, and suddenly you realize where you are, Dalat. The streets here are calmer, dotted with old French villas now worn and weathered by time. The air smells cleaner, cooler, almost sweet with mountain dew. But among all that freshness, there's still that familiar aroma. Bread. Yes, but not just any bread. It's richer, mingling with the savory scent of something simmering. You follow it down a quiet lane until you see a small shop glowing warm against the chill night air. People sit on low stools, their breaths visible in the cold. In front of them are small bowls of steaming sauce, nuoc siu mai, and on the side, crusty loaves of bread, waiting to be torn apart. This is Banh Mi Siu Mai Dalat, the mountain version, warmer, heartier, almost like a hug in food form. You sit quietly in a shadowed corner, watching. A woman dips her bread into the hot sauce, the crust softening instantly as she takes a bite. She sighs softly, the steam curling around her face. Another man scoops a meatball with his bread, the sauce dripping down his fingers, and he laughs, licking it off like a kid who doesn't care about manners. Here's a small truth most people don't know. Siu Mai in Dalat wasn't originally designed for bread. It was a Chinese-influenced pork meatball dish served with rice or noodles, but the cold mountain weather made hot dipping sauce and bread the perfect match. Vendors saw the chance, adapted, and turned it into the city's iconic breakfast. Historians still debate whether Dalat invented this version first, or if it was copied from lowland vendors, but locals will tell you proudly, it's theirs. The shop owner ladles more sauce into a customer's bowl, the steam rising in lazy swirls. The smell is rich, tomatoes, garlic, pork, and a hint of pepper, thick enough to cling to the bread's crust. You take a deep breath, and for a moment you almost feel the chill seep into your own skin. There's something soothing about watching people eat like this, slowly, dipping, tearing, savoring each bite. No rush, no noise. A young couple nearby clinks their bread loaves together jokingly, pretending it's wine glasses, and they laugh, dipping the pieces into the same bowl. You smile because this is different from the street carts of Saigon. Here, banh mi isn't just fast food. It's comfort food, something you sit down for, something you share in the cold. The mountain air brushes past you, cool and quiet, carrying the soft murmur of conversation and the occasional clink of spoons against ceramic bowls. And for the first time tonight, you feel yourself relax, as if even the city itself is sighing into the warmth of that sauce. The chill of Dalat follows you for a while, even as you descend back toward the warmer lowlands. The night air thickens again, heavy with humidity. But now there's another smell, old wood, baked sugar, and something faintly metallic. You follow it into a street lined with aging buildings, where a soft golden light glows through dusty windows. You stop in front of a shop with faded red lettering above the door. The wooden shutters are cracked, but the warm hum inside feels alive, timeless. You push closer, peering through the glass, and there it is, an old brick oven glowing orange, its heat licking the shadows on the walls. Inside, a gray-haired man moves slowly but surely, sliding loaves in and out with a long wooden paddle. His movements are deliberate, like a ritual he's repeated thousands of times. You notice the walls, blackened by decades of smoke, layered with the scent of bread baked for generations. This is one of the oldest surviving banh mi bakeries, still using techniques older than the city itself. You lean closer, catching the smell, deep, nutty, richer than the newer gas ovens. The bread here isn't perfect. Some loaves are uneven, some slightly burnt at the edges, but the crust is thin and shatters delicately when tapped. Here's a curious fact. Some of these old brick ovens were originally built for French baguettes. When the French left, Vietnamese bakers kept them, modifying temperatures and baking times to suit their lighter, airier loaves. Historians still debate whether these ovens are responsible for the signature crisp crust of modern banh mi. The old man pauses to sip tea, glancing at a photo hanging crookedly on the wall. You squint at it. He's younger there, standing proudly in front of the same oven with his father. Generations have kept this fire alive. A woman enters, greeting him warmly. She points at the oven, teasing, "Button ke la kua?" Still the same old oven, huh? He chuckles, answering, "Lo ne bin hun ka toy." This oven, he says, will outlive him. You watch as he wraps a few loaves in paper, handing them to her. She cradles them like treasure, sniffing the steam before leaving. The old man returns to his paddle, sliding another tray into the glowing mouth of the oven. The light flickers against his lined face, and for a moment, you feel like you're watching history itself, breathing quietly in this tiny room. The smell drifts out of the shop, warm and comforting, curling around you like a memory you don't even own. And you think, in a world rushing forward, some things survive simply because people refuse to let them go. You step back into the street, leaving him to his quiet work, but the image of that glowing oven lingers, etched into the soft hum of the night. The warmth of that old oven still clings to you as you move farther down the street, but the air changes, lighter, drier, carrying faint traces of something different. You walk until the city fades into quieter neighborhoods, then farther still, until the streets no longer hum with Saigon's busy rhythm. Instead, you find yourself near a small dock where wooden boats rock gently against the pier. People are boarding tonight, carrying bundles wrapped in old cloth, their faces a mix of exhaustion and hope. Among the baskets of rice, jars of fish sauce, and carefully packed keepsakes, you notice something unexpected. Loaves of banh mi, tucked carefully into luggage, wrapped tightly in newspapers and tied with twine. This is the beginning of banh mi's journey abroad, carried by Vietnamese immigrants leaving home. A woman in a simple ao dai sits on a crate, her child leaning against her shoulder, nibbling on a piece of bread as they wait. She strokes his hair absent-mindedly, her other hand resting on a cloth bundle where you can see the outline of more loaves, food for the long trip ahead. Here's a strange, quiet truth. Early Vietnamese immigrants often brought banh mi not just as food, but as a piece of home. Some even smuggled tiny jars of pickled vegetables or chili paste in their luggage, determined to recreate familiar flavors wherever they ended up. Historians still debate whether the first banh mi shops outside Vietnam started from these humble loaves. Some say families began selling them informally in refugee camps or immigrant neighborhoods, trading sandwiches for other goods before eventually opening small shops. You watch as a man ties his bag tighter, checking again that his precious loaves haven't been squished. His wife laughs softly, teasing him. "Banh mi put in a It's just bread. Why worry so much?" But he shakes his head, murmuring, "Banh mi bin da, kong gong do." The bread over there won't taste the same. The boat horn sounds, low and mournful. People begin to board, stepping carefully over creaking wooden planks. The air fills with the rustle of cloth bundles, the soft crunch of last-minute bites, and the quiet whispers of families saying goodbye to the land they've always known. You stand there watching as the boat drifts into the mist, carrying with it not just people, but flavors, recipes, and memories. Somewhere far away, these loaves will be the first seeds of Vietnamese food culture abroad. The pier grows silent again, just the soft lap of water against wood. But you can almost see it already. A tiny shop in a foreign city, years from now, where the smell of cilantro and pickled carrots will make someone stop in their tracks and whisper, "This tastes like home." The mist from the docks fades as you drift back toward the city, the streets waking slowly under the soft glow of lanterns. But something feels different tonight. lighter, almost playful. You follow the hum of conversation and the smell of fresh bread until you reach a bustling corner cafe, its tables spilling out onto the street. Inside, a group of men in crisp shirts sit laughing over coffee, their eyes widening at the tray set before them. On it are banh mi, but not the humble street versions you've been following. These are stuffed thick with fillings, stacked neatly, almost extravagant. And the faces around the table? They're French. One man picks up a loaf, inspecting it curiously before taking a bite. His brows rise, surprised, then he nods with a grin. C'est différent, he murmurs. Different. Not bad, just not what he remembers from home. This is the moment when the French themselves notice that their bread has changed here. A young Vietnamese waiter stands nearby, smiling politely, clearly proud. The French officer takes another bite, then gestures toward the herbs sticking out of the loaf, asking something you can't quite catch. The waiter explains, pointing at the cilantro and pickled carrots, his tone almost teasing. The Frenchman laughs, shaking his head, amused that his once simple baguette now tastes like something entirely new. Here's an amusing fact. Returning colonials often wrote letters back to France describing strange sandwiches in Vietnam. Baguettes stuffed with vegetables, chili, and pork. Some were charmed, others horrified. Historians still debate whether this reaction was more fascination or quiet indignation that their proper food had been reinvented. Across the room, another French couple shares a loaf, whispering to each other between bites. The woman giggles as she tries the chili, fanning her mouth dramatically, and the man just shakes his head, smiling. You stand at the doorway, watching this quiet reversal of roles. The French brought the bread, yes, but now they're the ones being introduced to the new flavor, Vietnamese flavor. The waiter clears the table, grinning as he hands another plate to a pair of local customers. The locals barely glance at the sandwich before tearing in. To them, this isn't new anymore. It's theirs. You smile, stepping back into the street, the sound of French laughter fading behind you. The banh mi has officially crossed the line. It's no longer just a colonial import. It's a Vietnamese creation, bold enough to surprise the people who invented the bread in the first place. The night softens as you walk farther, the lively cafe noises fading behind you. The air feels warmer, calmer, filled with the familiar rhythm of street life. But ahead, you notice something unusual, a small, neatly painted wooden sign hanging above a bright little shop. The letters are bold, proudly carved, Banh Mi, followed by a family name. Underneath, in smaller writing, the words Dung Ki Thung Hill, trademark registered. This is the birth of the first official Banh Mi brand, a moment when street food steps boldly into the world of business. Inside, the shop glows warmly. Loaves are stacked in perfect rows behind glass, each one nearly identical. Same size, same golden crust, same carefully wrapped paper stamped with the shop's name. Customers line up, not shouting orders like at the street carts, but waiting patiently, almost formally, as if buying something important. Behind the counter, a middle-aged man in a spotless apron works with practiced efficiency. He slices bread quickly, adds fillings in a precise order, wraps each loaf in paper stamped with the red ink of his logo. He smiles at every customer, thanking them as if they're guests in his home. Here's a curious truth. Historians still debate which shop was truly first to trademark banh mi in Vietnam. Some credit early 1980s Saigon businesses, others say it happened slightly earlier in Hanoi. But whoever it was, this change marked a turning point. Banh mi was no longer just street food. It was becoming a recognized product. A woman takes her wrapped loaf carefully, glancing at the stamped paper with a small smile before walking away. Another man tucks his into his bag like he's carrying something valuable. The pride in the air is quiet but real. Owning a branded banh mi almost feels like owning a piece of progress. The shop owner wipes his hands on his apron and glances at the sign hanging above his counter. There's something in his expression, pride, but also determination. Because he knows this isn't just food anymore. This is a name, a reputation, something people will remember. You step back outside, watching as the line grows longer, the glow of the shop spilling into the street. The carts are still out there. Yes, squeaky wheels and shouted street cries, but now there's this, a polished version, organized, ambitious. And you think, this is how banh mi takes its next big step, from street corners to history books, one registered name at a time. The city hums with a different kind of energy now. Louder, flashier, filled with neon lights buzzing against the night sky. You weave through a busy street where music spills from open shop doors and laughter bounces off concrete walls. But tonight, the crowd isn't gathered for coffee or late-night pho. They're here for something strange, something spectacular. At the end of the street, a banner stretches wide, painted in bold red letters. Hoicha Umtuk Saigon, Ki Luk Banh Mi Le Nut, Saigon Food Festival, the largest Banh Mi ever. You step closer, squeezing between excited onlookers. In the middle of the crowd, under bright festival lights, a team of bakers huddles around something absurdly long, resting on a massive wooden table. A single loaf of banh mi stretching over 2 meters, golden brown, steaming, and ridiculous in the best way. The crowd cheers as a man in a chef's hat steps forward dramatically, waving a knife like a magician revealing his final trick. The first cut sends a crack echoing across the plaza, crumbs flying into the air like confetti. Children gasp, adults laugh, and you can't help but smile at the sheer silliness of it. Here's a fun fact. Giant banh mi loaves were sometimes baked in festivals during the late 20th century, partly for fun, partly as marketing stunts to prove local bakeries could rival any foreign bread makers. Historians still argue whether these events were genuine community celebrations or just clever publicity tricks. The bakers begin slicing the loaf into dozens of smaller portions, handing them out to the cheering crowd. People tear pieces eagerly, dipping them into bowls of sauce and passing bites around. A little girl climbs onto her father's shoulders, reaching for a piece like it's treasure. You catch a group of young men posing for photos with the massive loaf, grinning widely, holding up slices as if they're trophies. One of them laughs, shouting, "And can I chuck no bangai?" Eat this, and you'll be full for 3 days. The festival air is alive with chatter, clapping, and the smell of warm bread mixed with grilled meats and sweet sugar from other food stalls. You stand quietly at the edge, letting the laughter wash over you. Because tonight, banh mi isn't just food. It's a celebration, a point of pride, something people gather around, not because they're hungry, but because they love what it represents. Vietnamese creativity, community, and joy. You step back slowly, leaving the crowd to their festival, the sound of cheers fading into the night as the giant loaf is devoured piece by piece. The night quiets again as you leave the festival behind, the glow of neon and the laughter of the crowd fading into soft, streetlight shadows. But as you move through the city, you notice something different in the air, something richer, heavier, like melted cheese and sizzling meat. You follow it until you find a brightly lit modern shop with glass walls and bold lettering, Banh Mi Fusion. Inside, young customers sit at sleek wooden tables, snapping photos of their food before taking a single bite. On the counter, a row of banh mi waits, not the traditional kind, but something transformed. Golden loaves stuffed with melted cheese, grilled beef dripping in smoky sauce, Korean-style kimchi, even one layered with scrambled eggs and avocado. This is the era of fusion banh mi, where tradition bends to trends. A young man behind the counter works fast, flipping sizzling strips of beef on a hot griddle that the smell of garlic butter filling the room. He spreads a creamy sauce inside the bread before piling the meat high, finishing with a sprinkle of shredded mozzarella. The crust crackles as he presses it lightly, the cheese melting into the warm bread. Here's a curious fact. Some of these fusion ideas weren't born in Vietnam at all. Vietnamese immigrants abroad experimented first, adding Western ingredients to suit local tastes. When videos of these creative banh mi versions went viral, younger Vietnamese vendors brought them back, eager to give tradition a modern twist. Historians and food purists still argue about whether this is a good thing. Some say it dilutes the soul of banh mi. Others insist it proves the bread's strength. If it can change and survive, it's alive. You watch as a young woman takes her first bite of a banh mi stuffed with grilled chicken and spicy mayonnaise. She laughs, holding her phone up to record her reaction for her friends online. "Ngon qua," she says between mouthfuls, her voice half muffled by bread and melted cheese. Nearby, a couple clinks their plastic cups of iced tea together like champagne glasses, biting into different versions of banh mi as if tasting something new for the first time. You stand outside the glass wall, watching the reflection of bright lights dancing against the night. This isn't the quiet, humble street food of decades ago, but it has its own charm, a sign that Banh Mi isn't stuck in the past. It's curious, adventurous, willing to play. As you turn to leave, you catch a glimpse of the menu board. Special of the week, Banh Mi Pho Mai Ba Nuong, grilled beef with cheese. You can almost smell the smoky sweetness trailing after you as you step back into the darker, quieter streets, smiling at the thought that Banh Mi, even now, refuses to stay still. The streets grow livelier again as you wander, but this time the buzz doesn't come from markets or food stalls. It comes from glowing screens, bright phone displays lighting up faces in the dark. You follow the soft chatter and occasional bursts of laughter until you see a group of teenagers sitting on low stools, their attention glued not to their food but to their phones. One of them squeals, turning the screen toward her friends. You lean closer and catch a glimpse, a video of a banh mi being made, filmed in perfect detail. Layers of pickled carrots, cilantro, and grilled pork arranged so beautifully it almost doesn't look real. The title flashes in English, Vietnamese Banh Mi, street food magic. The view counter, millions. This is the age of viral Banh Mi, where one good video can make the whole world hungry. The group laughs as they scroll through the comments, lines of excited strangers from faraway countries asking how to pronounce Banh Mi, begging for recipes, tagging friends with messages like, "We need to try this." One boy grins and reads aloud, "Someone says they're flying to Vietnam just for this bread." The others cheer, clapping jokingly as if welcoming that unknown traveler in advance. Here's a fun fact. The first truly viral Banh Mi video wasn't made by a local vendor at all, but by a foreign food blogger. Historians of food culture love to argue whether this helped or cheapened its image, but no one denies the impact. After that, international tourists lined up at street carts, cameras ready, turning everyday vendors into sudden celebrities. You glance across the street and see a woman at her small Banh Mi cart, glancing nervously at her daughter, who's recording her every move on a phone. The daughter grins, whispering encouragements. "Cứ làm đi mẹ, con đang lên mạng." Just make it, Mom. I'll post it online. The mother laughs shyly, her hands fumbling for a second as she slices bread, unused to being filmed. The group of teens near you hits share on the video, their faces lit with excitement, already discussing which famous Banh Mi stall they'll visit tomorrow to record their own clips. The smell of bread, herbs, and grilled meat still fills the night, but now it's mixed with the faint electronic hum of notifications and laughter spilling from phone speakers. You smile, stepping back as another ping sounds from someone's phone. Another like, another share. Because now, Banh Mi isn't just feeding people, it's feeding curiosity, traveling across screens faster than trains ever could. Somewhere, thousands of miles away, someone's about to see this same video, lean back in their chair, and whisper to themselves, "I need to taste that." The night feels softer as you walk on, the glowing phone screens fading into the distance. But there's a quiet excitement lingering in the air, something almost celebratory. You follow it until you reach a brightly lit square where a crowd has gathered, not for a festival, not for a market, but for something much bigger. A large banner stretches across the stage at the center of the square, letters bold and proud. UNESCO, Ẩm thực Việt Nam, to Hào Banh Mi. UNESCO, Pride of Banh Mi. This is the day the world officially recognizes Banh Mi as part of Vietnam's cultural heritage. The crowd cheers as a government official steps onto the stage, holding a framed certificate. Cameras flash, reporters push closer, and the official smiles before raising the paper high. The crowd erupts again, chanting Banh Mi, like it's a victory cry. You weave through the people, catching snatches of conversations. Proud vendors who've been making Banh Mi for decades. Young food bloggers live streaming the moment, even elderly women wiping tears as they clap. A man next to you nudges his friend, laughing. "Hồi xưa anh nghĩ cái bánh này được vinh danh vậy." Who would have thought this bread would get honored like this? His friend grins, replying, "Gờ cà phê chơi biết rồi." Now, the whole world knows. Here's a fact that still feels surreal. UNESCO doesn't just honor food for its taste, but for its cultural significance, its history, its role in daily life, its ability to tell a story about a people. And Banh Mi, with its long journey from colonial loaf to global icon, has plenty of stories to tell. A vendor in the crowd holds up a fresh loaf like a trophy, laughing proudly as customers gather around him. He starts handing them out for free, shouting, Banh Mi Vietnam, Banh Mi Thế Giới. Vietnamese Banh Mi, world's Banh Mi. The crowd cheers louder, grabbing the loaves, biting into them with wide grins. You stand still for a moment, taking it all in. The smell of fresh bread, cilantro, pickled vegetables, and grilled meat swirls through the air like an invisible celebration. The square glows under bright lights, but the happiness on people's faces shines even brighter. And you can't help but smile, because tonight isn't just about recognition. It's proof that something born humble, built by hands that never planned for glory, can still reach the world and make it stop, taste, and remember. You step back slowly, letting the cheers echo behind you as the crowd celebrates long into the night, waving loaves in the air like flags of pride. The night is quieter now, softer, as if the city has finally exhaled after all its cheers and celebrations. You walk slowly through the familiar streets, past shuttered shops and empty carts resting silently under the pale glow of street lamps. The smell of bread still lingers in the air, warm, comforting, like a memory that refuses to fade. You turn down a narrow lane, and there it is, a small wooden bench under a single dim lantern. A woman sits there, gently wrapping the last few loaves of the day in old newspaper. Her hands move slower now, tired but careful, as if each loaf is something precious. You sit across from her quietly, invisible as always, and just watch. She doesn't rush. She doesn't need to. The streets are almost empty now, and the only sound is the soft whisper of the paper crinkling around the warm bread. A young boy runs up, still barefoot, his cheeks pink from the cool night air. She smiles at him, handing him one of the loaves. No fillings, no pickles, no fancy sauces, just warm, fresh bread. He bites into it happily, crumbs dusting his chin, and you can almost feel the simple joy radiating from him. The smell drifts around you, crispy crust, soft crumbs, still steaming inside. It's the same smell that's traveled through all these stories, from French cafes to tiny alley ovens, from train stations to festival crowds, from war-torn streets to UNESCO stages. It has changed, yes, but it's still Banh Mi. Always Banh Mi. The woman leans back, closing her eyes for a moment, breathing in the quiet. The boy finishes his last bite and curls up beside her, his head resting against her arm. She glances down, smiling softly, and brushes a few crumbs from his cheek. You sit there a little longer, just listening to the silence. The city hums faintly in the distance, but here, time feels slower, softer. The bread in her hands cools, the steam fading into the cool night air. And you think, no, you know, that this is how Banh Mi will live forever. Not in fancy signs or viral videos, but here, in small, quiet moments like this. A warm loaf, a tired smile, a simple bite that feels like home. The lantern flickers gently, the air cools further, and you feel your eyelids grow heavier, the edges of the street blurring as if painted with water. The smell of fresh bread fades slowly, replaced by the soft hum of the night breeze, the faint rustle of leaves above you. Your breathing slows, matching the rhythm of the sleeping boy on the bench. The last thing you hear is the woman's quiet voice, humming a tune so soft it almost blends into the wind. And then everything drifts away. End of script. Sweet dreams.